And all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's Wednesday, the 10th of August, and I'm so excited to be talking with Terry Chapman today about what can lead to transformation and this great phrase that you're going to hear from him: how do we live in a world with less reactivity? Like, how do you live your life centered in a way, not only for you, but I don't know, the people you're around, the organizations that you're a part of, the efforts that you want to do. Is there a way to live your life and see the world in ways that are about transformation and not just transactions, less reactivity and more presence, all those kinds of things that we all want, you know, the things that we're longing for in our lives and somehow seem elusive. You know, they feel like that little floating thing in your eye that you kind of know is you see there, but you go to look at it and it disappears. From my own experience, that's the way lots of transformation has felt, is that it feels elusive. And so I'm really excited about this conversation with Terry. I'm Doug Pagitt in Minneapolis. We like to remind each other that we have a lot of different perspectives and worldviews, but sometimes we sit under the same sky. So here in Minneapolis, it's another beautiful summer day. I know if you've been following this podcast and live stream, I keep saying it's a beautiful day in Minneapolis, but this neighborhood has that going on today. Terry, good to see you. Thanks for being on today. Where are you now, and how is the weather?
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here. It's been a minute. So my feet touch the ground in Lenoka Harbor, New Jersey, sort of in the middle of a red spot in a blue state.
Okay. What part of the state? What part of the state is that?
It's kind of South Jersey, on the coast. I used to say the Jersey Shore, but that's lost its cachet. So it's not.
That's exactly what I was going for, though. Are you a Jersey Shore guy? And how's the weather on the Jersey Shore? Are people out enjoying the weather today?
It's hot. I think it was almost 100 degrees yesterday.
Really? And, is that normal, or is this one of those, man, the weather seems to be acting funny?
Yeah, it's a heat wave.
All right. Hey, Terry, you and I have known each other, as we were chatting before we came on, I don't know, 2 decades, which, you know, isn't a long time in like the history of the world, but in our lives, it's a long time, right? It's, I don't know, a third of my life I've known you and been hanging around, maybe more than that. So, and we've watched each other and been part of leading faith communities and churches and being public about that work. Can you give a little history of your own background? Because I think it really sets up not only how you've come to understand transformation and less reactivity in the work and the work that you're doing with the Center for Purposeful Leadership, but I also think it connects with people and reminds them of their own stories and transformations and transitions and comings and goings. So would you remind me and all of us of the long history of your own spirituality and professional work?
Sure, Doug. Thank you. Yeah, so we spoke of emergence as being kind of a theme that runs through our lives as we've woven our stories together over the years. You know, I think of Rilke's poem, "I live my life in widening circles. I may not complete one, but I give myself to it. I've been circling around God, around the primordial tower for thousands of years, and I still don't know. Am I a falcon, storm, or a great song?" And that kind of defines my life. I lean against, you know, what is emerging, this horizon. And it seems like as I move forward in my life, the horizon moves. And that's great. It's great to be alive. My formative experience growing up was in the Pentecostal tradition, evangelical, conservative, Pentecostal, which is a world that if you haven't been there, you have no idea. And that kind of created a wiring, I think, in my neural path mystery. You know, they had a pretty narrow worldview and context, but they were open to the unexplainable or to mystery. And so that gave me an openness. And then I moved through that. That story became too small, and I moved through that to, I went to Fuller Seminary, an evangelical seminary. And during that time, I switched to the Presbyterian Church and became a Presbyterian USA clergy, which had a swinging of the pendulum from from the Assemblies of God, where I was actually ordained as a minister in my previous life, so to speak, in the Assemblies of God. Then I went to Scotland and served Church of Scotland for a couple of years, and that brought me back to the States, where I've served churches here in New Jersey for 26 years. and left that about 3 years ago to, quote, retire. But there's too much good work to do. And so my life has been very full and continues to be ever since.
So we're going to talk about the Center for Purposeful Leadership and the work you're doing in these, especially these groups and these weekly conversations that you invite people into to learn and practice on how to speak to each other and to engage. I want to sort of go back to even the years, before you ended up at a Bible college. What was your growing up like? How did you grow up spiritually, or what kind of family, or what were you into when you were a kid?
Sure. So, as I said, it was in the Pentecostal Church, Assemblies of God. So my parents were very committed to that movement. And fortunately, that kind of very conservative, pretty rigid context was tempered by really compassionate parents. My mother, I would say, was a bit of a mystic herself, and my man of great integrity. And so while I was kind of exposed to that, and, as a child, growing up in a particular context, I didn't know there was anything else, for quite a while. And as I began to move out into the world, I realized, most people haven't even heard of these.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of, again, widening circles. It actually, Doug, in almost all my teaching and what I'm doing, I often begin with this question: what is the story that you're living in?
Yeah.
And is it too small for your soul? Of which is yes, basically. Yeah. And so, when we go to the edge of this current story that we're living in, that's where that kind of liminal space, I think, is where the growth really happens. And I don't know, I think I'd sort of hang out there.
Yeah.
And I find most life there.
I remember when I first heard the phrase liminal space or liminality, honestly, it might even have been from you. That was a new word for a concept that was very familiar to me, this idea that you're sort of between spaces. You're not fully in one situation, but you don't sense or have a groundedness in wherever you're going, and I don't know, you're in the shuttle van from the airport to the car rental place. I don't know, you're kind of in that strange in-between space, knowing that you have a direction that might be identifiable. And some of us really like those liminal spaces, and other people, boy, they just, it's easy to sum this up by people saying like, hey, life's about the journey, not the destination. I mean, that's kind of pop phrase for that sort of thing. Like, hey, be present, live where you are. It's not always pleasant for every temperament, personality, or even every life situation and circumstance. And I realized in my own life, liking liminality and this in-between kind of space and wanting to identify it and treasure it and even try to preserve it at times. Other people in my sphere of influence, so family or friends or church that I ran and organized, not everybody wants to be in those spaces. And that gets really hard, right? When you're cherishing or benefiting from a particular moment in time in life, and the people that are interacting with you that you've covenanted with or whatever your deal is with them, they don't really want that. And as leaders, we can end up sort of separating our life a little bit from the thing that matters to us versus the thing that we're leading in. Does any of that resonate with you, or do you think about it like that at all?
Absolutely, man. So another metaphor for this that's helpful for me. Last month, I was in Denmark traveling with my partner, Jan, who, just to mention, is a psychologist and specializes in trauma and somatic work. And so she's doing some really, really great work. Anyway, we were in Denmark visiting family, and went to the very tip of northern Denmark, to the place where the Baltic Sea and the North Sea meet. And you can see the two seas kind of coming together and crashing. It's just an amazing thing. And I remember that in the Sufi tradition, they speak of this kind of liminal space where the two seas meet. And it's become a very important metaphor for me, because on one hand, it's very important for me to stay grounded in my beloved child of God. to know that my deepest rootedness is love. Right?
Hmm.
And so I kind of stay grounded in that one experience. But then as Rumi says here, I love poetry, man. I'm a little bit of a poet myself. But Rumi said, I was happy enough to stay still inside the pearl, inside the shell. But the hurricane of experience lashed me out of hiding and made me a wave moving into shore, saying loudly the ocean's secret. As I went and then spent there, I slept like fog against the cliff, another stillness.
Wow.
So
wow.
it's to stay. And, so I try to stay grounded in my own spiritual practice.
Hmm.
My primary spiritual practice is walking, hopefully in the every day, and centering prayer, meditation, kind of a Christian form of meditation. And if I don't stay grounded in that, I can quickly move into my own kind of reactivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if I just stay there and not find expression of that in my life, it turns into some kind of regressive fundamentalism. So it's like, that intertidal zone between knowing that I know in my bones that I'm loved and it's all going to be well, and then moving into the chaos of life with some expression of that. And I'll end this kind of little rant with this. So, I've kind of made my home there and sort of see my calling. I'm really clear on this. My calling to be, sort of like a lifeguard at that liminal space between the mystery and the expression of that mystery in life. And to be there, hopefully, with a less reactive and helpful presence to help people navigate that type.
Do you put those two together, your actual physical presence of walking and centering prayer? Like, are those, when you said you do those things, do you do them together? Do you have a walking prayer practice, or do you walk and then also have a separate centering prayer and work?
It's the latter mostly, although when I'm walking, I usually find myself moving into some sort of rhythm of what I would call prayer.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Word for me, it's just bringing my awareness of the divine. And I think for me, it's being out in the more than human world. The access to that. But centering is, a set sit. I often do it with my wife every morning for 20 minutes. And it's really an action of consent, just as I'm able, because monkey mind is a big thing for me.
Yeah.
As I'm able to let go again and again. It's based on the teaching of Thomas Keating, a Christian who brought, he experienced kind of the Eastern meditation and the beauty of that and wanting to bring that into the West. So I started this kind of movement of meditation.
This metaphor of a lifeguard in the place where the seas are meeting, knowing people are in there, that's a different metaphor than being like a swim coach, which a lot of leaders think of themselves as a swim coach, right? Yeah. Like, my job is to teach people a way to be and to do.
Beautiful.
Do you think lifeguard specifically in relationship to not like a swim coach or something, or was that not a choice of difference?
I love that, man. Yeah. So here's what I think. So to frame the context, I think we're living in, to use the word apocalyptic times. Things are unraveling. Big things are unraveling. And so because we're hardwired for reactivity, which will lead to increasing violence. So as things continue to unravel, the value of answers goes down and the value of questions goes up. And so for me to stand at this kind of liminal place and just be curious, I'm also a spiritual director. And so I love like sitting with people and just saying, so what's the story? What's going on in your life? And spiritual direction is a bit of a misnomer. So it isn't so much like a swim coach as it is, this kind of a posture of curiosity and kind of actually a primary assumption at the Center for Purposeful Leadership in these conversations is the wisdom really is in the room, in the collective wisdom that is gathered. And so we spend a lot of time tapping into that collective wisdom, because that's where it really lies. So less of a teacher than as a kind of abiding presence. Something like that.
Were you able to be that same way when you were a pastor, or did you feel the many roles of pastoring pulling you one way or the other?
It was tough, man. My last experience was I was 18 years in a Presbyterian church here in the same town where I currently live, and we walked together over those 18 years, and it was pretty hard at times especially around LGBTQ context and ordination issues and all these things. It was pretty tough navigating that space, given the conservative context in which I live. But we managed through some really hard conversations to move toward a beautiful, welcoming, and inclusive, at least intention. And I think so. It's hard, pastor, as you know, brother. There's a lot of, it's like I remember the sermon I preached after the Trump won the last election, and I just let it all out. I was like preaching perhaps more African American tradition.
Yeah. You dug deep.
Yeah, man. It's like I remember just a series sort of a staccato things. I said, well, we'll wait and see. But if this happens, we won't wait anymore. And so I was just like listing the things and people really were upset at this, So that was the context. So the second Sunday after that sermon, I actually printed out the sermon and I said, so what are you upset about here? Again, like intention and impact are sometimes misaligned.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You mentioned this beautiful Rumi quote, and for a lot of people are familiar with Rumi poetry, but not everyone. And I find, all the translations of Rumi poetry, it's just stunning, right? And it identifies things that we live and experience, that I live and experience as a middle-aging, white guy in Minneapolis. And it's fascinating to me that the social content or context of Rumi was so different than that. Do you know enough Rumi sort of history to give people a little bit of a picture of Rumi's situation and setting? Because I think it's easy to tell ourselves the situation of our lives, where we're living, our social construct, the United States, that's what's creating this feeling in me. And then you hear this, poetry from other times, other places, and you say to yourself, oh, maybe this is a human experience I'm having, not just a momentary cultural experience. Yeah. So I think might be something in that.
Yeah, well, I'm actually forgetting it. I don't have a strong capacity to remember dates and context. One thing that I would say is Rumi and other poets in that sort of genre tap into what might be considered the perennial stream. Underneath the contextual silos of human experience, there runs a stream that it's just true. And great poetry, Mary Oliver.
Right, right.
Others just kind of touch into that. And that's really, man, what makes my heart sing. And I know you too, we live in these silos, these contextual religion and politics, but to touch into that place, man, and then to translate into the various contexts that mean just true and life-giving.
You just think Rumi, this, poet from the 1200s in what we now call Afghanistan, Iran, Persia, talking about the kinds of things that you raised there, and that, throughout much of the selected poetry that's been translated, gets into this space of, can you say the beginning or maybe all of that poem that you said a moment ago? Because I think it was really, really poignant to hear someone expressing this idea that I have a sense of the pearl, the divine, but then the pressures from the outside world. And you say, oh, this is a person, in 1230, in Persia, saying these things, not someone with social media running at them, not someone who has to live under the political nightmare that, we sort of see in our situation, not the racism that we see here, but the culturalism and racism of that period. So I think it's just helpful to sort of hear this in a not contemporary mindset, and to ask ourselves, what is in the human experience that seems to transcend place and time, to tap into something more true and real.
Well, if Rumi was the third person in this podcast this morning, he might say something like, I am a poet of longing. And that's the human experience, longing. So Rumi would say, don't ask for water, ask to be thirsty. Don't ask for water, ask to be thirsty, because longing, Rumi would say, is the most direct path to the divine. So this kind of poetry, Rumi, the great poets tap into this, this eros, this kind of fire.
Yeah.
This, in theological terms, it's the imago Dei, this kind of place in us where the divine lives. And when we are kind of stuck in the spell of separation, poetry stirs up that human longing for connection. But this poem, again, is a beautiful poem of longing. I was happy enough to stay still, inside the pearl, inside the shell. But the hurricane of experience lashed me out of hiding and made me a wave moving into shore. I love this line, saying loudly the ocean's secret.
Yeah, that's unbelievable stuff.
Spent there, I slept like fog against the cliff, another stillness. Yeah, it actually reminds me of, who was it, who talked about, Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, talked about a first and second naivete. And who was it said, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. We can stay inside kind of a first naivete, and that's what a lot of religion, I think, does. And kind of, I don't bother me. Life is hard as it is. So what about this kind of transformation? And yet, the hurricane of experience will lash us all, man.
Yeah.
Out of hiding, and so to be there, to be a holding presence in that movement. Say, I hear you. I think, Doug, the most powerful experience I think I ever had of the divine, in my own life, the mystery of the universe, of greater reality, is to kind of sense or hear, not in an audible voice, but just kind of the words, I know. So for me to be there when people are grieving, or feeling like the bottom's dropping off. And it feels like my spiritual directees, these people that I talk to on a regular basis, it feels like they're all coping with kind of an impasse lives. And just to be able to say, tell me more. I know. I don't have answers, but I have questions.
This idea of trauma is interesting to me. And, just have your wife on sometime. And actually, she should come on and talk with my wife, Shelley, who is a yoga teacher and instructor, and is doing a lot of work in trauma-informed yoga as people experience it in their body, and then body movement that helps to identify those issues. So trauma is a growing area of understanding for a lot of people, and somewhere related to that is regret, right? So some things and ways that we've lived. And so if you're okay, I want to dive in a little bit to like how you've thought about your own past, because anyone who's gone through the kinds of transformations, changes religiously, personally, that you have, I think has some insight here. It can be easy for people to think about the past they were raised in, maybe that they chose, or that, in your case, you didn't choose to be raised in a religious situation that gave you certain narratives and frames and all. And to some degree probably didn't even have all freedom of choice to pick your next step. Like the next available steps were pre-sorted by the past, right? So we're never totally free to just go do whatever, right? You're set in a location and you have responsibilities and you only know certain people, and it's just so we can feign a freedom for choice, but we don't always have it. And it can be hard for some people to incorporate their past, to transcend it and include it in where they are. But that seems incredibly important that people do something like that and not just sort of take the impulse of, the Amazing Grace song to say, I was blind, now I see, I'm leaving all that darkness behind and just moving into the light, this kind of thing. But rather to say, oh, these are all moments that shape me. And yet my current self isn't always fully pleased with my previous self and what I did and how I lived and the thing. So this regret kind of, I don't know, it lives in there. And sometimes the things we regret are not the things that we thought were a bad thing at one point. It's things that we thought that was just the best I could do. And yet I don't know what to do with the regret of the choices that I made that I thought were really good choices. But boy, I can see how limited they were now because I now have this more mature perspective. It feels like that level of regret and trauma that we carry with us, it's powerful. Like when you say, what story are you in and is it too small? Boy, some people's ability to deal with our own past is really, really difficult. So we recast it or we re-narrate it or we tell, you find this out every time you go to a family get together and you start talking with relatives you grew up with and you're like, oh yeah, I've totally forgot, or I saw that differently, or I didn't even remember that. My sister said to me, I was giving her a ride to the airport and she's 58, I'm 56. And she said something about, where we lived as a kid. And, that's just up around the corner where I got hit by that school bus. Mm. And I was like, I totally forgot you got hit by a school bus. She was like, I wouldn't forget that I got hit by, like for her, that was an immovable memory. And for me, it was like, I remember now how important it was and how framing it was. So do you have any thoughts about that? How people deal with their own past and history and regret and all, and what we do with that now? Because I know a lot of people who listen to this and pay attention to this stream are people that have gone through their own transformations and that old life isn't all that far away. It's one phone call. It's one friend. It's one get together. It's, it's being embodied by other people currently. It's not like it's, disappeared. It's alive and well.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So perhaps two things. First, trauma. Jan and Shelley, your wife, would say that the issues are in the tissues, right? So trauma, these kind of past events that were traumatic events, get stored physiologically and cellularly in our bodies. And so you just can't erase those sort of memories by will, so there's somatic ways and, of discharging some of that energy. So that's one thing. Another approach to use the word regret, which is somewhat different energy than trauma. Story, and we look back and I would do things differently, perhaps, what I know now, but I knew what I knew at the time. But the practice of grieving,
there you go,
one's inconsummate story. Karl Rahner, I mentioned earlier, he said once he said, it is in the torment of the insufficiency of everything attainable in this life we come to realize all symphonies remain unfinished. I say it again, it is in the torment of the insufficiency of everything attainable in this life. We get somewhere in the path and it feels good, but this horizon keeps moving. We realize all symphonies remain unfinished. So there's there's both grieving intentionally, doing that work.
Yeah.
Because if we don't intentionally and consciously grieve, it metastasizes and finds expression. Richard Rohr, one of our teachers, says if we don't transform our pain, we will transmit it. And so being conscious of those unfinished narratives that we regret and working with that ground, hopefully in a compassionate container, can transform that experience. Those, and I think that's why we need these holding places. One of the primary offerings that I programs at Center for Purposeful Leadership is some work that I do with Carolyn Baker, who is a colleague of mine, a dear friend. And we offer a program called Weaving Threads of Grief and Joy. And so as the Center for Purposeful Leadership is intended to be a place where leaders, and everyone's a leader because you have influence person, right? We all have influence. So how can we hold the space, as we've said? And so a primary offering of that is, as a leader, how can we hold the space for grief? Because there's a lot of grief. And so we're offering this program in October. And I could say more about Center for Purposeful Leadership. We do some.
Yeah, I'd love for you to. Yeah, okay. Can you tell us about it? And these weekly essential conversations is, I think, a real gift and a real fascinating piece. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, it was in March of 2020. I was in Uganda. That's another expression of my work. I do a lot of work with children in Uganda. Actually, I went once, Claire and a mutual friend of ours, to Uganda and really fell in love with the people there. So I was in Uganda in late winter 2020 and came back to the pandemic. Barely made it back to the country as the pandemic was unfolding. And I called my dear friend, Craig Neal, the founder of the Center for Purposeful Leadership and the co-author of The Art of Convening. And I said, Craig, what are we going to do? And so we started these every Monday morning conversations. And I think next week, I'm actually convening it next Monday at 8, it's 90 minutes, 8 a.m. Central Time, called Essential Conversations. And I think that's 116 that we've convened.
Wow.
And so it's live on Zoom, and we bring conversation starters, authors, leaders, Margaret Wheatley, Richard Barrett, Richard Leiter, others, have come to, and I hope we can invite you soon to come and be a conversation starter who brings, starts a conversation for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we have an opportunity to move into what we call wisdom circles. Again, because that's where the gold lies. And usually there's, we've had, I think we average 30, 40 people, but sometimes as many as more than 60 or 70 on these calls. And
wow.
It's just really been great. It's a lot of work, as you know, to sustain kind of this weekly, but it's been really rewarding.
Talk about why these wisdom circles and the convening model that you use and that you're developing and extending. Why is that important? Why is it important for people to be in smaller groups over some time, and just all the manifestations? Because it feels like the action and practices of the circles and of having a conversation is equal in power to the topic of the conversation. So it's the practice itself that can have forming and shaping and benefits to it, and not just the topic and the words and the ideas that are experienced.
Absolutely. That's it, man. It's like going from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side.
You're full of these lines. Honestly, if you don't have like a little Terry Chapman colloquialisms list somewhere, it would be really beneficial for people.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just pause before you say beautiful things about this art of convening and the process of it. Have you always been someone who can remember phrases and punctuations like that? Like I try them all the time, and I would just mess them up. Like I can't remember the rhythm and the poetry, and then people like you just pop these things out. And I know you're not reading it off of a screen. It's it's in there. Have you always been that way, to just be able to remember a great phrase that's full of insight and, just apply
Yeah,
it in the moment?
you know, don't overstate it. Because,
Okay.
but
Well, you've done it about 6 times here already in, whatever we've been at it for 35 minutes. So it's pretty great. It's a great skill and gift. Have you really though? I mean, have you always been that way? Like you're a guy that remembers song
but
lyrics, or you're someone that remembers phrases from shows and movies? And because I don't know, there's like groups of people that can do that. And then others of us who just look on with admiration when someone,
yeah, well,
makes
I
that into,
attention to it. Like there are some things I do like to memorize. Have you ever seen or heard David White in person?
no, only through a video thing. One of our co-leaders of all this Will Come Good stuff, Samir Samalovich, is really connected to David White and has done some in-person events with him, but I've never had the privilege.
Yeah,
But I've seen videos and stuff.
I know Samir well. He's a great guy. Anyway, David, like he has memorized like hundreds of poems. He'll just stand, and recite these poems. I'm not that, so there are a few things I've memorized and I repeat them all the time.
So people that know you well and are listening to this are like, Doug's just being wooed by the memorized set.
Yeah.
Well, it's still impressive. Like you are to me where maybe David White is to you. Like it's an impressive feature.
Thank you, brother.
All right. So tell us about what the art and the act of convening is, and really this relationship piece, because I feel like relationship is the center. Like I think story is important. I think practices that we do, and fundamentally human beings are relational characters and beings, and the degree to which we are in healthy relationship with the divine, ourself, and others, which Jesus teaching, we call that love, God, yourself and others, which I think just means right integration and relationship between those is really important. And some traditions really get into practices and really get into content, and they don't always care about the relational component of them and the I don't know, the kind of human relationality of it. But convening theory and the art of convening feels like it's fundamentally that. It's about people interacting with each other. And that feels different to me. Maybe it's not than people that are action focused or content focused. It feels like it's different. So I'm just wondering if you think about it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, primary value at the Center for Purposeful Leadership is that all transformation is relational. All transformation is relational. So Craig and Patricia Neal and Cynthia Wald, I think in 2011, 2012, published this book, The Art of Convening. And it's a model, it's a convening wheel that has 9 aspects. And at the center is what is called the heart of the matter. Every spoke of the wheel goes back to the center, the heart of the matter. And at the heart of the matter are 2 questions. Who are we? And how are we called to be together? Actually, when Craig was first dreaming up this wheel, he wanted his first impulse was just to put love at the heart of the heart, which it is, actually. Oops, what happened?
Everything was fine, and now you've gone away.
Yeah, we'll get them back on here.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. It's really, really fascinating. If people haven't gone to centerforpurposefulleadership.org, so just that phrase, Center for Purposeful Leadership, that's the organization that Terry Chapman, who we're talking to, is connected with, that's their website. And you'll see the events. They have these, how you can sign up for being a part of an essential conversation on these Mondays. They're open to people, and you're welcome to be a part of them. Hi, Terry. I was just giving people the update on the website and all that stuff for you. Well, you came back in. Every time this happens, when someone disappears and comes back, I feel like I'm on Star Trek and someone's gotten into that little booth where they like phase out and then they kind of phase back in. I'm trying not to believe we're just having a video conversation, that somehow we're actually in this in real time together.
Yeah. So just to kind of pull on that thread a little bit more, it really has the Center for Purposeful Leadership, I'm the Director of Convening Communities. And we've just transitioned from a for-profit company to a not-for-profit, and really look at the social enterprise or a social profit, and it's this transitional place right now that, moving the culture from a program delivery company, trainings and convening and other trainings,
Okay.
to really try to get people engaged, becoming stewards of the organization. I think that's really essentially what is needed in the world. It has become for me my primary community, and I just get great joy and nurturing there, and I want to share that with other people. So that's really what it's about. And just one more thing about that: to move from a Christian silo, as beautiful as that was for those many years, to this kind of more diverse community, just brings so much life into my all different kind of perspectives. And this is the world that you live in as well, and it's beautiful to kind of expand that content.
You'd said, for 28 years, you were working in the same town you're in now as a pastor. I don't know if you've ever tried the thought experiment, but I don't know, 20 years ago in 2002, had you run into the current work that Center for Purposeful Leadership is doing now, I don't know, was it in a time fold doing that back in 2002, and you 20 years ago would have seen that, how would that all have struck you? How would you have thought about it in that stage of life and pastoring, and kind of where you saw yourself then, and the work that you had in front of you to do?
Yeah, beautiful question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but beautiful question. Right. It has, so I think the kind of emergence and evolution of my life has been both, there's a continuity and an unfolding, and then major shifts at particular times. So, yeah, I may, as I kind of imagine going back in time, I may have shifted from my role as of a local congregation sooner, because I think I've become more aware of what is needed in the context. But who knows? I knew what I knew at that time. But I just am so glad to be alive at this time, brother. There's just so much work to do, and the challenges, of course, are there, and there's a lot of, as I said, grief, but. So retirement is like, what? I have colleagues. So what are you going to do when you retire? Some people are going to play golf or go on cruises.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to do other things, and this is part of it. I mean, part of what I find interesting about this 20-year, window of time in our lives is just to recognize that we now, wherever we are now in our lives, have a different set of experiences and capacities and containers to hold, and projects to be about, and anxieties to deal with, that allow us to do things now that we couldn't, and maybe even should not have tried to endeavor in at other times, and I'm not saying it's about age or anything. It's just what life experiences people have. I run into people, 30 years younger than me, and their experiences for their 26 years have been closer to my last 20 years than, my previous 20 years. So it's not about age. It's just about what experiences we've had and how we've had them. And could we see those things, and take them on, then versus now, and trying to honor that change, and recognizing that, and feeling like, we have as much, there's as big of a project in front of us as there is behind us. I know this is kind of middle-aged guy talk here, right? Or middle-aged person talk, where you sort of wonder, Shelley and I just had our 34th wedding anniversary, and depending on how things go, we may have had longer together than we do in front of us, right? Like these kinds of realizations where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, let's recognize, that, and that we're not the same people, and the next decades are going to be significantly different than the previous ones because of a lot of things and circumstances, and just reorienting ourselves to the new adventure. I don't know, it kind of feels that way, right? Like I'm ready for this now and I wasn't before, or I don't know, wasn't ready and wasn't, I don't know. That's not really the words I'm trying to, but you see what I'm getting at, right? Like there's a sense that there's something available to us now. So a lot of things I do now, 20 years ago, if somebody presented to me, hey, you could do, and they named my life right now and said, how about if you do that 20 years ago? I'd have been like, do I not want to do that? I don't know how to do that. And I've got other stuff to do. Like I can't be doing this, 20 years ago. And I feel so similarly now, people have said, because I've stopped working after 20 years at the church that I worked at. And people said, oh, you think you're going to get back into that? And I'm like, well, depending on how the next few years go, I may have to, go become a Methodist minister just to, get a paycheck. But short of that, no, I don't see myself just doing those things again. And having to reconcile that, right? Like that, I spent significant life energy doing a thing that I wouldn't want to do now. And I do things now that I totally would not have wanted to be doing back then. That experience of development and growth, I don't know, I find it really fascinating. And how do you put together all the resources for your future that you had for your past? That's sort of the thing I'm babbling on about here.
Man. Yeah. So I just, in a couple of weeks, I'll turn 67. And so looking at the horizon, getting closer and closer. And, I hear like 20 years ago, you're right. So the currency of my life at that point is different than the currency that I have right now. But my intention at this stage of my life, I say this very sincerely, I want to be spent. I want to be spent. I want the currency, the well that I have, the insights that I've gained, the poetry that has come through my life, the relationships and experiences. I want them to flow through me into the world, like in Rumi's poem, and made me a wave moving into the shore, saying loudly the ocean's secret as I went and then spent there. There's no holding back, man.
Yeah, that's
like discernment now, because I want to be wise in how my currency is being spent. And it's in relationship with my friends and colleagues. Discernment is literally, I teach about discernment, and it's sifting through the opportunity. What is the currency that I have in my hand? What is the information that I have? What does the world need? Am I the one to do it? So, these questions of discernment are really important at this stage of my life.
Yeah, those are elusive notions to me. I can't quite. I'm not good at that stuff, so we should chat about that some other time offline, how I could get better at that, because I just feel like every time I've tried to like be that person that like decides and this and that, I don't know, something happens. And when I just sort of go with it and meet and serendipitously have experiences, it's like, wow, that feels like that's all the color. Like the other stuff feels like it's the shape, but boy, the color is popping from those other. So that's such a, and I've thought a lot about like, yeah, okay, but at some point you're going to reach the age where you have to do this. Like you just got to start, paying attention and putting a little intentionality and discernment behind things. I'm like, I don't know that I have the skills for that.
Well, it seems like you're doing pretty well with it, navigating your path. You're doing really good work. And
yeah, it feels like it, but it does. It also just feels like, I don't know, you sort of take what's coming. I feel more like, I think about those batters in baseball. I'm not a big baseball fan, so I might, fan, so maybe I'll get this sort of wrong. But when I played in Little League baseball as a kid, I think I swung at like the first 5 pitches, no matter what they were, and the other more patient batters would stand there and wait for their pitch. And I was like, I don't know, I'm probably going to get a hold of one of these, I'd foul a couple of them off, and I struck out a lot. And I remember our coach saying, you don't have to swing at the first pitch. I always felt like, well, I don't know. It seems like, well, that seems as good as it. Like there's kind of a temperament thing of like, I don't know, just swing at just take a swing at the first one. And the people who are more successful in baseball overall, of course, are those super patient ones that know how to pick a pitch. And I don't know, it feels like a metaphor for life somehow, that I'm just like, I don't know, I'm going to get 5 swings. I'll probably take them on the first 5 pitches. Hey, this, when you're talking about, being spent and all, I think I hear you talking about that in a way that's not sacrificial, right? It's not like, hey, my job in life is to empty myself and burn myself out and kind of leave, I don't know, like not have anything for me, which some people hear sort of instinctively, especially if they're from all the traditions have it, but I know it most well inside the American religious Christian tradition, this kind of sacrifice narrative that I think is really harmful to the human spirit. I hear you saying something else that's more about effort and all the rest. When I used to be an ultra marathon runner, which I started doing in my 40s, and now I can't do that because of a hip replacement. So I ride bicycles long ways, but I like endurance sports. And one of the Terry Chapman quotes that I do actually remember is a T-shirt that I saw running behind someone in one of those ultra marathons, and it said ultra marathons, which just means a marathon longer than 26 miles. So they tend to be things that really sort of wear you out. And it said ultra marathons, you've got what it takes, and it will take everything you've got. Right. And it was this kind of idea that, oh, you're totally ready for this. And it's going to be a real effort. And it's not pain or sacrifice. It is expending the assets, resources that you have for all this goodness. Is that similar to how you're thinking when you say, I want to be spent? Yeah. Do you contrast that with a sacrifice narrative versus a more?
Yeah. So the words carry a lot of freight. All right, and have a lot of history, particularly in the religious context. So what's kind of shimmering for me is the word flow. I want to be in flow. And in order for me to be in flow, I have to attend to my interior state, my own self-care. Otto Scharmer, in his book Theory U, quoted actually an insurance executive, William O'Brien, who said, here's another quote for your brother, the success of any intervention is dependent upon the interior state of the intervener. Wow. So it's really important that, so I love traveling. I do backpacking, although I upgraded to an Airstream travel trailer now.
Oh.
So, so my wife and I were camping this past weekend, just to get out. And, I've got quite a bit of travel in my schedule. I love that. And yet, I have passion for life, and passion involves suffering, or at least pain. Passio, rooted in the word for to. So there's like an intentional edge state or suffering, not from an egoic place, but from really more of an intention to surrender and consent to flow.
Yeah.
And all kinds of words around that. But, I think that's my intention, to be, to hold that balance really between making sure that I have currency. I'm not burnt out.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed, maybe whelmed, but not overwhelmed.
Whelmed. That's great. Let me be whelmed. I feel the same way about the word nonchalant. I need to be chalant, apparently. Not sure what it means, but I don't want to be nonchalant. So I'm going to find chalantness. I've recently started playing guitar.
I know.
Started in January. It's been any new project people take on as adults, I think, has these characteristics to them, right? There's sort of a beginner's mind. There's all that joy and beginner's mind stuff, and just a lot of cross currents of experience. I've been surprised at how much in sort of end of the beginner and into the intermediate level of guitar instruction, that my in-person instructors and the online people that I use, some recorded and some in an apps, all talk about relaxing. They're like, hey, we're pretty sure your guitar strumming sounds horrible. I'm like, yes, like talking back to YouTube videos, like, yeah, it totally sounds horrible. Can you help me know it? And then they'll talk about, so you really have to relax that wrist. You have to relax that arm. You have to remember to breathe.
Mm.
And those are things that I just never would have pulled into this action, right? Like, I'm learning to play the guitar. I feel like everything is so precise and so deliberate, and you have to hit the 5th string on a strum, not the 6th string or the 4th. Like, those things are that far apart, I don't know, a quarter of an inch apart. I don't have time to relax. And they're like, oh, that's the only way it's going to work, is to breathe and relax, and doing all these hand exercises to loosen and relax. It feels like that's also true in these things you're talking about, right? Finding a way to flow and release and relax for the purpose of intentionality and for a chord to ring out, and, and all the rest. So it's been really fascinating. Do you see some of that in what you're talking about, and some of what the Center for Purposeful Leadership is trying to do, is give people this, I don't know, simultaneous relaxed space along with the I don't know, the action or precision?
Sure. Yeah. A favorite song that I've been living with recently is, I forget the artist's name, but the words are, loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go. Let go.
Wow.
So that, so breathe, breath, relax, central practices. There's another word I'd like to add to that trifecta, and it's the word consent. There's breath. It brings us home to our body. We are in partners with HeartMath. We had Deb Rosman recently as an essential conversation starter, and coming to that energy of the heart and beginning to breathe through the heart is a really beautiful practice of centering. So we practice that, and then relax. Just kind of, we often do kind of some kind of embodied meditation, but this kind of intention of surrender to love with a capital L, the greatest reality, is a really beautiful part of what it means to be spent.
Terry, thank you for this conversation. If people do want to connect over at the Center for Purposeful Leadership, the best thing is just to go to the website and
go to the website.
Start signing up.
We also, at the website, you'll see an invitation to join. We have a Mighty Networks community, leadership community. That's a great place where we're trying to get some engagement. But the website has all the information, and it'd be great to meet people there. And if anybody wants to contact me, I'd be glad to talk to them as well.
They find your information can they find it there on the website? Like, there'll be details about all that. And you do other things. You're an author. You've put out writings in the past, and you produce videos and the other stuff as well that is addition to the website.
Yeah. I think the things that I'm involved with is men's work. So I'm very involved with a group called Illumine by Richard Rohr. We do men's work around the world. So I'm very involved with that. Illumine, like Illumine, but Illuman. And the primary thing that is offered there is something called the Men's Rite of Passage, which is a 5-day experience. So involved with that. My work in Uganda, it really keeps me alive. I've been to Uganda 9 times, going again in the spring. It's a beautiful partner in Uganda with children. And so there's plenty of good work to do.
Yeah. Well, what a treat. Thank you for this great conversation today.
Great to be with you,
really
Doug.
Appreciate it.
As a conversation starter soon.
That would be an honor. Yeah.
And, actually I'm going to be in Minnesota soon. So maybe we get together as well. So
would you please? Yes.
Centered in Minneapolis as well. So.
Okay. Oh man, that's great. Something to look forward to finally. I appreciate it. Let's be sure to get together.
Thanks, Doug. Great to
Hey,
see
and
you.
thanks to Lisa, Kimberly. I'm going through the chat here. Dan, anything we should pop up? Craig, Randall D, Jim, Marjorie, Alex. Yeah, people just reminding us of what great questions there are. It's a story you're living in too small and all the rest. So thanks to all of you for all your great commentary and chatting with each other. And if you don't yet watch this over on YouTube, that's the best place to do it. Most interaction and helps us in a lot of ways and helps you in your own ways that you'll find out once you get over into the YouTube world if you're in only the Twitter or Facebook, Twitch world. So thanks, and we'll be back. Hey, by the way, on Friday, we'll be putting out some material from an event and press conference and some counter programming for a Christian nationalist event that's going on in Batavia, New York, which is between Rochester, New York and Buffalo. So friends, keep your eyes out for that. There's a big Reawaken America conference, which is sort of a traveling roadshow of Christian nationalism and insurrectionists supporting political work. And Faith in Public Life, Faithful America, and Vote Common Good are coming together to do a press conference and event there. So if you know people who live in the Rochester or Buffalo area, tell them that we're up to something there. We'd love to see them at that event. And we'll record that and get that available to all of you so you can see that kind of action that's going on, because just a lot of work we have to do in this world. So Terry, thank you.
Thanks,
and we'll
Doug.
talk to all of you next time around.